Welcome to a quick refresh on Workday Adaptive Planning. As many of you may already know, Adaptive has two major releases every year called R1 and R2. Um, they typically fall in March and September, or for those of you that don't know, I suppose. Those are typically the major release windows, so where you'll see new product features, you might see UI refreshes in there, things like the Predictive Forecaster and AI updates. That's when, typically those windows are when you'll see those new features released. There are, of course, iterative updates throughout the year as well that can include perhaps performance tweaks and some minor bug fixes, but also some minor features that you may have spotted that appear sort of throughout the year as well as they become available. So it's not exclusively March and September for the release window, but that's typically when we see them. And today I'm here to give you an update on 2024 R2, which is the release that came out in September. Many of you may be familiar with some of the features in here already. I think Mark may have mentioned it, but this is essentially a redux of the session that we had at our last customer day. So there won't be anything necessarily new to those of you that were at that event, because nothing major has released in sort of the month and a half or so since we hosted that. But having said that, a quick update on Workday Adaptive Planning is to just take you quickly through what came out in R1 as well. So this is more for, I think, those of you who perhaps weren't aware of this, because some of these new features can sort of come in hot and fast. And if you're not using them in anger, then you can understand how you might have missed a couple. But for those of you who are perhaps new to adaptive planning as well, this is just a refresh on what you saw come out in the update in March 2024. They're sort of categorized here in sort of agile, connected and collaborative, and intelligent and scalable. But this is just to give you an overview of pretty much what you see in a typical release. Now, the updates are starting to come in hot and faster. There's been a big rework of the back end for adaptive planning to sort of tie it into the Workday infrastructure, which means that the updates can now come a lot more quickly, a lot faster. But also the significance of those updates are also taking a step up as well. So on the left hand side, just going down the list. In fact, I've got a little laser pointer here. I think that I can use. There we go. So we have the personal what ifs. They were a brand new feature that allow you to create scenarios on the fly, what if scenarios with a push of a button. And I can flash that up in a minute when I take you through some of the other features in a demo. But it effectively allows you to give your end users the ability to, for each of your versions, your budgets, your forecasts, your plan data, to create a brand new scenario within that context. So if you have a current budget that you're working on, each end user can have up to 15 personal scenarios that they can create as a copy of that version. They can make their own tweaks and changes. The whole thing is audit trailed and tracked. And then you can go through it as part of your workflow approval process to look at the changes they've made. So rather than having 20 contributors punch a bunch of numbers into an existing budget or plan, you can have them build it up iteratively through scenarios or through personal what ifs, and then sort of merge those into the version. There is a bit of roadmap there in that they are making those shareable in the next upcoming set of releases. So the ability to create what ifs, share them amongst the team, and effectively have sub versions within adaptive planning as well. So as an example, that's a pretty major feature that came out in March, and they're already planning sort of additional functionality with it as well. And I would say that's probably the biggest feature or one of the most used features that has come out of late, because it is so evolutionary, I would say. There's also the usual bits like the user interface. Many of you may have spotted already, but the Workday Blue and a lot of the formatting and the UX is sort of being revamped to be a bit more sort of conducive to your design scales and themes and that kind of thing. So the idea is that they're kind of scaling back the Workday Blue and giving you more of a blank canvas to play around with. So using your own color schemes, your own logos, and obviously it's the early stages with that process at the moment, but there's obviously more of that to come as well. Sort of skipping through the rest of the list, there's things like the Financial Planning Configuration Manager, so the ability to connect if you're a Workday Fins or HR customer, the ability to sync your dimensions, your level structures, and everything through to adaptive planning. And that's also true if you're a consolidation customer as well for Workday. You can link all of your structures and all of your metadata through all of your lovely Workday products without having to set up extra data connections and manage the flow of anything through integration. There's also some new features in OfficeConnect, and the Planning Center is probably a big one, I would say, this one down here. The ability which brings your back-end metric tracking into the front end. So normally with these cloud-based platforms, the ability to see, who's used your models, your reports, your dashboards, who's logging on most regularly, what the load time is on some of these models. That stuff is kept in the back end, so you're not typically able to see it. If you guys have worked with tools that use things like AWS, a lot of that stuff is locked into the IT team in the admin page. But Adaptive, you're using the planning center to give you the ability to actually start seeing this stuff in the forefront. So seeing how many times a report, a dashboard, a sheet has been accessed, how long it takes to load, of your dimensions, your accounts, your metadata, what's actually being used across the model. So you can see all of those performance metrics in real time. So they're bringing more of that stuff forward to help you guys effectively manage and administrate your own system, which is rarely seen in the cloud planning space or the cloud space in general, I would say. There's a few bits around here around sandboxing and on-demand refreshes for tenants as well. So just an example there of some of the things that are coming through. Report scheduling is a pretty big one. So the ability to iteratively schedule reports to just come out with the latest refresh of data. And on the right-hand side, probably the biggest ones down here are around the Predictive Forecaster, because everyone loves this big AI button that you see here, right? It's the big sparkly AI. So Adaptive is leaning into the AI side of things, and I will show you this morning as one of the key features for the latest release, what the Predictive Forecaster looks like and what you could do with it. But this is just a brief summary of what has been to give you an idea of what is coming down the pipeline in R2 and then for R1 next year and R2. It's this kind of scale and quality of features we're seeing with Adaptive. So a lot has happened this year from a feature perspective in the product, and there's obviously more to come as well. Having said that, I'll skip straight to sort of a key release in sort of the latest feature release for R2, some of the key features. I've highlighted a couple here that I'm just going to show you this morning. Some of them I'll just quickly go through in a summary sort of capacity. But if you've got any questions, then feel free to stick them in a Q&A if we have one. We may do. If we do have a Q&A open, then please stick a question in if there's anything you want to know. But one thing to highlight is the UI interface. There's been a brief update in it this year as well. Typical stuff you can expect, updates to dashboard layouts. So the ability to, they've basically trimmed some of the fat off of the dashboards to make them a bit more condensed, a bit cleaner, a bit more visually accessible effectively. So you can fit more visuals and more elements on the page. And that's obviously building up to some sort of more major releases around the dashboarding and reporting capability in Adaptive that's around the corner in R1 of next year and then R2 as well. There's also an option as well. This is something that many of you may not know, but this little note here is quite important because I know some of you highlighted at the customer day that you didn't know you could do this, but within the visual preferences tab in your system, in fact, I will show you that now in Adaptive. So within Adaptive, in your administration pane at the bottom here, there is an option to disable changes to the UI until you're ready to promote them. So when you're in the administration page, there's an option here called Visual Preferences. If you open that up, some of you may know this is where you can set your logo and a couple of other things. There's a big list of recent visual or visually impactful changes to the system that will appear here in a big tick list. You have the ability to toggle these on and off. And they come on toggled off by default, I believe, when a new release comes out. But you have the ability here to say, actually, I don't want to roll out the new visual updates until I'm ready. If you're mid-budget or mid-reporting cycle, you don't necessarily want all of your end users to open Adaptive and see a completely revamped visual interface. As nice as it may look, it can be a bit of a headache. So Adaptive gives you the option here to turn that off. And then you can turn it off, after the cycle's complete when people are ready to accept, new changes to their interface and that kind of thing. So you can manage the rollout of that kind of stuff. As I say, many of you highlighted that you didn't know you could do that at the customer day. So I'm just highlighting here, just so you know, there is an option in there to do that as well. From a visual perspective, one thing they mentioned out at the bottom is quite key, the modern design that's in tune with latest industry trends. So all these planning tools, they kind of understand what the standard is for interface and experience, and pretty much Adaptive is in step with the industry on that one. There is something I'll show you around the dashboards as well this morning, just to give you an idea of what what the new visual changes look like. One thing you may notice is that all of the filter boxes at the top here have been refined, so they're much smaller. You can fit a lot more on the top of the bar here. So we've only got a handful in this case, but you can fit more filters, more slices at the top, and the big old Workday blue banner is also gone, and just condensing the whole view down just to make it more data rich, more insight and analytic rich instead of just, overhead and UX, right? They're trying to clean the whole thing up. But one key feature that's quite handy in the new dashboards, it's sort of underspoken or understated, is this little option at the top. Some of you may have seen it already, but there is an option now to set filters for your dashboards within adaptive planning. So you can set up personal filters. So when you open something like this one's giving us a nice variance for revenue in terms of analysis. So how are we trending versus last year? Looking at cost versus budget for travel and entertainment. What's our major revenue streams and where do they come from? You could previously obviously log into Adaptive, and your security would drive your ability to access different levels of data. So if I belong to, say, the UK in this particular structure, then I just see the UK data. But if you're somebody with a multi sort of faceted view, if you've got a lot of access to the data and you find yourself flying between different views, quite a common use case for administrators or for managers with lots of departments and functions that sit beneath them within their organization. Rather than have to save copies of this pack with those views set, or have to make those changes every time in this big list of your hierarchy, and then also make changes to your dimensions, Adaptive has given you the ability to change some preset filters. So the default view here is everything. So I'm seeing the entire global view for this particular dash, but you also have the ability to then set up a custom view. So in this case, I've set one up called the UK. If I give that a click, it will automatically filter to the UK and show me the data that I want to see there. And it will also include dimensions as well. It can even include time structure. So you can basically set a pre-made filter view for the dashboard and then pick it out of this list. So I could pull out the US, for example, and it will take me straight to the States and show me that view and apply any filters that I may have. It's an understated change, but it's part of that UI refresh that they've just rolled out. And it's quite a nice one. So the ability to very quickly change these perspectives. You can even save these as shared perspectives as well. So if you're working with multiple users on a dashboard, and it might not be at this summary level, it might be for a group of products or services or particular regions that you're looking at, you can set filters and share them amongst your team and say, look at this view that I've just created in this dashboard, give it a click, and they can open it up themselves, click on the same filter and see that view. So again, Adaptive just adapting, pardon the pun, to the way that you're using the system, the pains that you currently have in working collaboratively on these reports, and just adding in new filters just quite casually, really, to make sure that you guys are getting the most out of the system as well. So yeah, there's a general view of the UI. Most of you will have seen the changes that have come around that end anyway. So some of the there's a few other changes that I'll just go through before I show you some of the bigger features. For example, predictive forecasting, not to tease you too soon. One is translating actuals. So Adaptive have added in a new feature that allows you to import your actual balances and have them already translated by your source system into your desired reporting currencies. If you can't tell, I'm just reading that topmost point there. So the idea was that previously you load your actuals in, Adaptive would assume they're in one currency, your reporting currency, and then you would need to use the built-in currency conversion tool within Adaptive to see your currency translated effectively. And that's fine. The currency conversion tool in Adaptive works really well. But of course, the issue then is that you've got two separate tables of FX rates, of currencies, spot rates, that kind of stuff in your source system and in Adaptive. So there is a slight chance, if you don't have those two systems integrated, that those rates could be off potentially to a material level of impact. So they've just given you the ability to load in your actuals using whatever currency is that you want to load them in at. So basically the ability to load your actuals in at a local currency level, sort of pre-translated. If you like. And the real impact is just that bullet point at the bottom there. It just improves data consistency across all of your various tools. You don't necessarily have to be a Workday Fins customer, as it suggests there, but whatever system you're using just helps you keep that consistency and just take that headache out. So a fairly minor feature, but one that I've already actually had a conversation with possibly some of you who are on this call about this feature already and how you're starting to use it. So worth bringing up on this call, I thought. There's also the ability to archive versions. That's brand new for R2. You may have seen it in the version management screen. Again, you may have seen all these features already. But this is just the ability to archive versions. They did have the option before to lock down versions and effectively sort of annex them away, but they've kind of formalized that functionality now. So the ability to lock and archive versions more formally, but also view formula errors and any issues that may have been present in that previous version. You can then run a bit of an audit on those and see any problems that you may have had. So you can effectively, even within your planning solution in the cloud with Adaptive, not be copying issues across into future plans and forecasts. So it just gives you, a bit of oversight, a bit more control. You can kind of see the theme here, right? Just trimming down the UI, but also giving you more features like the planning center and stuff like this to just put more of that capability in your hands, but also keeping it accessible to the Office of Finance and not something that's just an IT-led capability effectively. But as I say, this is a handy feature because it allows you to, when you lock a version, obviously it stops any of the calculations from running. It will pre-calculate all of your formulas within that version, and effectively mean you can change forecast formulas in future plans and budgets and forecasts without impacting historic data. But the ability to archive those versions also takes a little bit of the performance out of it as well. So having to maintain multiple versions. If you've got old quarterly reforecasts that you might want to throw up on a report, for example, but you never need to touch or modify those numbers, then archiving it is a great way to reduce the impact on performance for your system, but also keep the data there and accessible for referencing in future reports. So again, just a very minor feature that they've just thrown in because they know that many of you I know, having worked with them, are working with big long lists of versions. And it's just about, again, performance and maintaining and keeping your system clean, a bit of housekeeping functionality built in there. Another feature just to highlight is the Planning Center enhancements. So obviously the Planning Center was a release that came out in R1. This is sort of being fleshed out quite significantly, and I imagine there's going to be a lot more on the roadmap for this. They've shown us a couple of things around what's coming up, but this speaks to it. But there's obviously a few updates that are coming out, and the latest one is looking at process management as well. So not only giving you the ability to look at your sheet and report metrics and also look at your, the number of dimensions and accounts and everything else that you've got in the system, but also now giving the ability to look at some of the processes that might be taking a while to run. So you can see the example they've shown at the bottom here where somebody's exporting to Excel. And it could be, in this case, I mean, the fact that it's taking nearly 3 minutes, it could be a sort of multi-dimensional, cube template. It could have 50 dimensions on there with, a couple of million rows of data. If that's taking a long time to run, and it's stopping other people from, perhaps exporting to Excel, or I don't think that's an issue in this case. But if it has an impact on performance running something massive like that, you have the ability to manage it within this view. Obviously, things like loading sheets, which are all handled on the client side on your personal machine, you won't be able to cancel those because that's just a case of closing your browser window, right? But for stuff that's running in the back end in the cloud, such as extracting a load of data into an Excel template, then that's something that as an admin, you now have the ability to see the performance, who's running the task, how long it's been running, but also the ability to cancel it as well. So again, just more capabilities, more functionality being brought forward there from an administrative purpose, just to help keep things moving swimmingly. And I think the Planning Center it will keep evolving. So I would say if you're not already using the Planning Center, if you've not had a look at it, I'd add that to your list of things to check out. Because I think it will continue to grow, and the functionality in there will become a lot even more useful than it currently is, and you can kind of see that with this release here. We've got a question on the Q&A, which I'll just pick up very quickly as we go. Where does it archive versions to? That's a good question. So if I go back up here. So it doesn't necessarily archive the versions anywhere. All it does is remove, when you archive a version, it will just remove it from the list of drop downs in your planning model effectively, or it should do. So if you click on your drop down, it should take out the option to archive, or sorry, to select a version when you're looking at a model. But you should also be able to then pull it up on reports and things like that. But all it does effectively is just pre-calculate stuff. So you would still need to archive it in folders and that kind of stuff to make it, to clean up your list of dimensions or your list of versions. But ultimately, once it's archived, all it does is just store the data. So it overlays your actuals, and then within the planning version itself, and then pre-calculates the plan data and effectively just hard codes the numbers. So locking the version, they've kind of split. This is kind of what locking the version used to do, but they've split the functionality out. So you lock the version to prevent data entry in the plan. And when you archive the version, it will pre-calculate any formulas in your plan. And then it will take your actuals and effectively bake them over that particular part of the plan where they've overlaid. And then it will take that version and just effectively keep it on the shelf. So in fact, I don't think it hides it anymore. They used to hide the version from the main version list. I believe it still leaves it in there, having said that. So you'll still be able to see the version. It just effectively pre-calculates the whole thing, and keeps it there, but not necessarily taking any resource. It's not running any calculations and that kind of stuff. Oh, we've got a couple more questions as well we can go through. The use case for archiving will be when done with the budget process. Should we archive it? Yes, Jay. So once you've finished with your budget process and you've locked your version down, if you don't need to make any changes to the planning figures, if you don't need to review any numbers, upload new data to a plan or a budget, you don't need to change any forecasting formulas, that kind of stuff. If you can tick those boxes, that's when you typically want to archive a version. From a performance perspective, this only matters if you've got thousands of versions. It's only really going to make an impact there from a performance perspective. Otherwise, archiving the version is just a nice way to sort of keep your house tidy. As I say, it effectively pre-calculates the logic as well. So if you want to change, in fact, the biggest use case, just to touch on that point, is once you've finished your budgeting process, if you never want to make a change to those planning figures, or more importantly, if you want to make a change to a future forecast that might impact a previous budget, that's when you'd want to archive the version. So from my professional opinion, the best sort of practice approach to using this is to archive versions when you're completed with your plan, your budget, your forecast. As soon as you've done everything you need to do in a version, archive it, because it gives you the flexibility to then change the formulas, the forecast, the budgeting process that you might have in future plans without impacting, your completed versions, effectively your finished budgets. So I'd say, best practice is to, once you're finished with a budget or any kind of plan or version, lock it, archive it, pop it in a folder, or however you want to organize it in the structure, and then you can pull it up on your reports in the future if you want to. But that's typically how I would approach it. I'll just flick back down again. So we've got another question about the planning center. We've got a question about the archiving as well. I'll cover these. Can you unarchive a version? Yes. You can just untick the archive version box and it will bring it back out again. The only consideration is that if you unarchive a version and you've changed some forecast formulas, Adaptive won't store multiple versions of your formulas or your calculations. So as soon as you unarchive a version, those pre-calculated figures will then recalculate. So if you've got a particular calculation for revenue that you might have in your model, you've archived the version in the budget, and then you create a brand new forecast, change the way that revenue is forecast, make a material change to a formula, and then go back and unarchive a version, it will then recalculate that forecast for you. So that revenue calculation in the old plan will then recalculate using the new logic, because Adaptive doesn't keep multiple sort of copies of versions or of formulas for versions unless you explicitly set up a version specific formula. So there is a consideration there around best practice, but you can unarchive versions or remove versions from the archive list if you want to. But I would be cautious if you made material changes to a plan. Just be aware of that before you do it. We also have a question around the planning center. If you can't see the planning center in your model, you should have access to it. Within Adaptive, I believe there's an option within your security settings. So if you go down to your administration tab, as we did before, and then within the permission sets, so this is where you would set your access to the features within Adaptive. It should automatically be available. For me, I believe I'm the administrative set at the top here. You can see on the right-hand side in your model management access pane, there's an option right at the bottom to enable the planning center, just down there. If you have that ticked, then you should be able to see in the menu on the left-hand side, I believe it's in, I can't remember where it is now. It's one of the tabs in here, but it should appear in here somewhere. I should remember where I put it. But then you have the access. You should be able to see it in this menu list. I think it might be possibly in the model overview page potentially, or this might just be our sitemap. But somewhere in here, the planning center will show up as an option. If you can't see that,
and I think it's in model management because it's under the section on the admin model management tick box. If you go back to where the tick box.
Yeah, good shout. Yeah, they did have it. So similar to the scenarios, it's a good point. So there is an option in here for the scenarios as well. You'll see an option in there for the scenarios. They've now moved the planning center into the model management page, which makes sense because this is more of an admin task. You wouldn't necessarily have a use case where an end user needs to access it through here. But yeah, from this point, I mean, you can see as an example here, I've not made a lot of changes to this model. So it's just giving me an overview of all of our configuration metrics, our sheet metrics and our report metrics. Once you've got that option enabled, you should see that in your model management window effectively, and you can run through all these lovely capabilities and functionalities, as it were. But please do keep the questions coming as well if you like. I do like a bit of interactivity on these sessions. So one thing I'll jump back to. So there's obviously some changes to the Planning Center as well. I encourage you all to use that. It's a really good tool and it will continue to get better. Um, in terms of other features, they're just touching on some of the minor ones. I'll show you some of the two of the bigger ones at the end as well, before we wrap up. One is replacing mode by level for imports into modeled sheets. A great title for a very minor feature, but for many of you, this will be quite handy when loading data into Adaptive. So they've now added a new ability. You can see on this little drop down potentially just on the right hand side. To effectively just make loading data into Adaptive into a modeled sheet much smoother. So this is particularly useful when you're loading it through integration, or it also applies when you're loading data in from a flat file as well. So if you're loading an Excel extract into Adaptive, possibly into a workforce plan or into an asset register and that kind of stuff, you now have the ability to only replace data for the imported levels. So if you're loading a file in for multiple levels, Adaptive now effectively has the ability to read the file you're importing, check the levels in there, look at the mappings in your model, and then only replace the data that it finds in there. So if you only need to replace a subset of data in a model sheet that you're loading into, then you don't need to replace the whole sheet. You don't need to append extra rows onto the massive template that you loaded in the first instance. You can now iteratively build that up by just replacing some of the data that's already in there effectively. So you can go into the UK office and replace all of their data and leave the rest of the business untouched for any of your model sheets now. Again, there's almost a trend here of giving you that functionality, but also making it a bit more iterative and giving you some more, I guess, niche or minute controls and configurations around how you interact with Adaptive, even when it comes to loading the data. There's also an option to do it with your via design integrations as well, which you can see in that bottom right screenshot. So if you're loading your workforce plans, your HR data in from a system currently, and you only want to update the records for certain parts of the business, certain levels of your structure, then that option's in there as well. So again, a really minor feature, but just a nice one to know about. As I say, many people might miss that option as they're going through it, or they won't even think to think of it because they don't know it's there. So just as an example there, just bear in mind, there's lots of little features like that just in the pack. I will note as well, by the way, just as we're sort of getting towards the halfway point of the session or just past it, that this is only a subset of the features that I was going to take you through today. There are even more minor features within Adaptive that I encourage you to check out and have a look at. So this is just a summary of the smaller ones that I wanted to show you, but there's even more that have come out in R2 as well, which is handy. Report scheduling, kind of touched upon that as well. That sort of came out, the initial report scheduling functionality came out in R1, and they've then sort of renewed it for R2 and made some extra changes and feature tweaks as well. Pretty much what it says on the tin, the ability to create your snapshots and send out notifications to users, but also schedule it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that these reports will then sort of refresh and go out on. It just means that every month, every week, you will get an email in your inbox to the latest cut of the report. So you open your email, you click on the link, it takes you straight to Adaptive. You log in with your username and password, and you see the report with the filters, the view, and everything, the snapshot view of it applied, and you can access the report immediately. Again, nothing exciting there in the sense that the reporting itself hasn't necessarily changed, but the way in which you access the reports, it's just giving you a bit of capability there, a little bit of functionality. So the ability to just go into your emails and click on a link and open a report, as you perhaps already do, but with adaptive planning, with the enhancements that you sort of enjoy in the system today. So again, just a really minor one, but worth knowing about. You can now schedule reports, which is quite nice. One of the things, this is probably the most exciting feature so far, is data export performance. I can see all of you sat there right now, probably hyperventilating at the excitement of this particular feature. And that's because pretty much all this is doing is just expanding the export capability, or basically expanding the performance of the API in Adaptive. And the reason I brought this one onto this call is just because it is quite I guess a landmark feature in the sense of how Adaptive's approaching data scalability and the ability to not just export data and the performance of that, but also loading data in as well. It's often a question that comes up when we're talking to customers around, loading data in integration. How easy is it? How fast is it? Is it live syncing? That kind of stuff. This is just to give you an idea. They've now increased the limit of data you can export from Adaptive from 500,000 up to 2 million rows. So in a single export action, you can now export 2 million rows at a time. And there's some of you sat there right now possibly thinking, 2 million, that's nothing. I'd love to load or export more. And that's, God bless you if that is the case. But for the rest of you, 2 million rows is significant. I mean, that is an enormous amount of data, to be exported. There are some use cases where it doesn't support that many rows, but for the majority of the use cases in Adaptive, 2 million rows is supported. But it just means it just makes the process faster. If you do need to export large amounts of data, and that's not just exporting into a flat file into Excel, it's also the ability to connect it into other systems. So if you're using a BI tool, for example, that takes data from your adaptive planning instance and builds your reports and everything, and you need that level of granularity, then it obviously helps speed that process up as well. And again, just it's all more of an insight as well into how Adaptive's taking an approach to integration and data in general. It's all about improving the scalability. So, if you need to load in more granular data and export more granular data, the performance and the capacity of that is quite key as well. And they're leaning into that, and they're conscious that that's what people are doing. We've got a question about speeding up importing data into Adaptive as well. So I guess that's kind of hopefully answering that question a little bit. So they've started with the ability to export data from Adaptive because they know the majority of customers, that's where they're seeing the most volume of getting data out of the system into other tools for perhaps for BI purposes or just for general reporting purposes in other systems as well. There's also items on the roadmap to increase import capability, and this is the kind of infrastructure, and the reason I'm bringing it up on this call today, the infrastructure behind this feature then feeds back into the importing side of things as well. So I would keep your eyes peeled on the future release notes, because the ability to import data faster at larger scales is on the docket as well. So yeah, it may be in. This is all roadmap stuff, of course, safe harbor statement, but it could be an R1. We'll then see an improvement to the import scalability and performance as well. But it could be an R2 release, but it's also something that they work on iteratively. One thing you'll see mid-year from a release point of view for Adaptive is that a lot of the changes that come out in between R1 and R2 are often to do with the API and the data integration side of things, because they can make changes to that system quite regularly without it impacting the rest of your adaptive instance effectively. So yeah, as I say, keep an eye peeled. This is good though. The reason I share this, as I say, is because it's indicative of bigger things to come, which is really nice. And now we move on to, obviously, keep the questions coming as well. We love to see some questions. We're going to move on to two of the big flagship changes that you guys probably would have heard about or seen or know a little bit about already. I showed these in a little bit of I showed them a little bit at the last customer day as well. The first one of the two key ones to show you this time is the Predictive Forecaster. So machine learning AI, it's on the tip of everyone's tongues. You can see it again there, the lovely AI magic button. There's two kind of thought processes around AI. A lot of people think AI, okay, so from a reporting perspective, I want to push button and get number. That's what I want, right? I want the ability to type in a prompt. More often than not, people will say, I want a chat GPT style of experience where I punch in a prompt and say, show me a report for revenue and costs across this time frame for these entities, yada, yada, yada. Hit enter, and Adaptive spits out all of the lovely stuff without me having to do anything. So the AI and prompting capability, that's on the roadmap for R1 for March next year. So the ability to live query the system within Adaptive, that is on the docket. I believe it's having a provisional rollout for users of Google Sheets. So the ability to use OfficeConnect, the add-in that some of you may know about, is being rolled out for Google Sheets or for the Google suite of products in R1 as well for next year. And that will include some provisional capability to then query those models using the AI tool within Adaptive. And all they're doing there really is just tweaking the existing AI sort of language modeling tool from Fins and HR and bringing it into Adaptive. So it's quite a quick and easy kind of chop over, if you like. But the current, in my opinion, the more important side of AI is the machine learning, the predictive forecasting bit, which is what they've gone for here. So they've prioritized this feature over the ability to sort of query data from an AI perspective. And the reason for that is because hopefully, if you look down the left-hand side of those notes, it's the ability to build forecasts using statistical algorithms and different diverse data sets as well. So this is really what people are thinking of when they think AI from a planning perspective, especially from, in the sort of context of finance. It's the ability to build plans, budgets, forecasts, or complement them more realistically with predictively forecasted data. So there is a system built into Adaptive now. There's some notes on the left-hand side. Effectively, it gives you the ability to configure an AI-generated version of data, and you can do with that whatever you will. Rather than tell you about it in a slide, I will show it you in a different capacity. So within Adaptive, the predictive forecast is already in here. Again, you have to have the ability to access it within your security and everything else, but within the modeling tab, you might have spotted as well when I was in here, there's an option down here in the intelligent planning section that says predictive forecaster and anomaly detection. So within predictive forecaster, if you give that a click, you can see we've got a couple of predictive forecasts in here already. You can have as many of these as you like in theory. There's no theoretical limit to the number of versions you can have. And these can be absolutely sweeping forecasts for your entire, you can in this case here, you can see we've got one for an entire P&L, or it can be for just one of your product revenue sheets. So you can have sweeping full statement forecasts across all of your GLs, or you can have really targeted, perhaps it's just a volume of units sold forecast that you want to build based on some trends and some actuals and some levers. The way in which you use this is quite extensive, and this is the point where I would say I'll show you a quick example of how it's set up here, but then I will also leave this in your capable hands to play around with and see how you might want to use it. One thing I can show you is if I open up this top one, Ben's personnel plan. As an example, when you're creating a brand new forecast, you give it a name and a description as you would expect. You can then select what you want to forecast. So you can pick an individual model, a sheet within your system, and you can set one up for as many sheets as you like. And you can do this for all of your models or just for a couple of them. You can do it, as I say, you can do it for the whole P&L balance sheet and cash flow if you'd like. Once you've selected the model you want to forecast, you can then pick the version you want to forecast for. So previously, you had the option to sort of build a machine learning version, so a dedicated version for it. Adaptive now allows you to supplement any of your existing budgets, plans, and forecasts with the predictive forecaster. So you can see here, I could pick my working budget, maybe my current forecasts in here. I could use a bespoke, pre-made version that I've dedicated for my intelligent planning data, or I might want to fill it into, an FX analysis version. Maybe I've got strong US dollar rates and I want to then load a table of rates in that's which are more relevant than ever now, right? But the US dollar goes up and I want to load that data in, and then I want to build a forecast using the machine learning tool on the top of that. So Adaptive gives you the ability to do that across any of your existing plans. So there's two major use cases to highlight here. Many people will build a machine learning generated forecast and then use that to complement their existing forecast budget non-actuals plans to see how they stack up when compared to a statistically algorithmated or whatever sort of set of data. And some people will also want to take something like their working budget or a quarterly reforecast and use this tool to build in not just loading in data and formulas into that plan, but also loading in machine learning generated figures alongside it. So building it into a single plan, a single version of data to complement the whole piece, or to use it as a benchmark for your other versions. They're the two most common use cases. You may find more in your experience with the predictive forecaster, but just to give you an idea, that's how many people are using it at the moment. You do have the ability to select the forecasting start and end period, and this model only goes up to 2025 for some reason. But you could have a 10, 15-year forecast in here. There's no limit to the range, just like it works the same as the versions in Adaptive. So in this case, I'm just predicting 1 year of data. And then you can apply some filters to this as well. So you can pick the number of accounts you want to forecast. In this case, for my product revenue model, I can pick just a single account. In this case, I've got multiple cuts of our units sold. I could pick one of those to forecast, or I could say actually just forecast the whole thing. Some of them, if they're pre-calculated, units and price and things like that, they're pulled from models from different assumption tables, so it won't forecast those as a default. But anything that I can manually tweak, like my discount percentage, Adaptive can auto calculate that for me. So I can select all the accounts or just a couple. And again, you can do that for the level structure. You could say just for one particular entity, one function, one product, one service, whatever it looks like in your structure, I can select one or all and predictably forecast the entire thing. Same rule applies for your dimensions as well. So in this case, I could say for just one customer, just one product, or as I say, just one anything, or all of them. So in this case, I'm selecting all products and all customers. I want to predictably forecast everything about my product revenue model in this example. And the important thing here is that you have the ability to then pick out your reference data. So typically your actuals, of course, Adaptive offers you layered actuals in here. So you could take your source system actuals without any adjustments in there if you want to keep a really nice, clean sort of set of actuals to define that forecast. If you've got any anomalies that you might have some adjustments for, or maybe you've got big spikes that you're accounting for in different actuals versions, you can pick the full actuals version to account for those, or perhaps you want to leave them out as well. So it could be things like, back in the day, the COVID adjustments and that kind of thing. In your planning structure, you can then just pull out your source system actuals instead without any other adjustments on top if you want to build that in. So you have control over, even when you're loading your actuals as a reference, over the shape of the data that you want to pull in, which again is really nice. And then you can also pick the range of actuals. So in this case, we go back to 2021. You could have 10 years worth of actuals in here. We've just got sort of 3 years worth of data. In this case, but you could have 50 years. The more actuals data you have, the more intelligent your forecast is going to be, as you can imagine. Good data in means good data out. You can also add plan versions in as well, which is really nice. So the ability to pull in your planning data from another version and have that effectively act as a lever for your forecast as well. So to complement the actuals, which again is a nice feature to have as well. The really important thing here as well is that you have some options for your algorithms. Now, in my personal experience, this selection pretty much is preferential. No one can tell me that one particular set of statistical algorithms is necessarily better than another. It depends on the data type that you're feeding into it and sort of what you're aiming to get out of it as well. There's more of these being added all the time, so this is something a list you'll see grow in the future. So if you have a preference for Croston, or perhaps you're a light GBM kind of guy or gal, then your favorites are in here. But the auto fit option at the top here is the one that will effectively pick one of those options based on the data you're feeding into it. So this is Adaptive's best kind of calculation, if you like. If you pick that auto fit option, as I say, it'll run through and pick them out. You can apply seasonality to this as well, and that flexes depending on the level of detail of the data that you've got. You can add in rounding of negatives to 0. You can put in multiplicative seasonality, which is my favorite sentence in any system I've ever worked with. But you can also build in lever sheets as well. So if you've got things like, it could be, I don't know, it could be, sort of summary market share, inflationary interest rate sort of levers. It could be, workforce planning levers. It could be weather patterns. It could be whatever you want to load in that could affect the trend of your forecast. You can pick those out, and Adaptive will then feed them into the algorithm effectively. And what's really nice about this, just to wrap a bow on it, is that I've only got one other thing to show you before we wrap up as well. The nice thing about this is that it makes this accessible to you. So AI, machine learning, this kind of functionality in any other tool is going to be something that an AI, an IT, or a technical admin will need to manage. All of this is at your fingertips. I can save this right now. So save that forecast as it is. I've not run it yet, but I can then go to the end. I could run all of these at the same time if I wanted to. But I'm just going to take this one on the right. I'm just going to hit run live on this demo. It's going to queue that for me, and it's going to just run that forecast. It could take, some of them, if it's a really big model, it could take 10 minutes if you're covering lots of data, 50 dimensions, that kind of stuff over, a 50-year forecast or whatever. In this case, it's quite a small set of data, so it might take maybe a minute or two, but that's now running effectively. I can go away, and if it's a big one, and make a cup of tea. I can hit refresh and see it pull through. But as soon as it says success, oh, there we go, it's updating, 33% done. I can then go to my reports, my dashboards, and then pull that data up. And obviously, you can use the anomaly detection tool on top of this to then sort of complement that process. So once it's spit out these numbers for me, I can then challenge those with the other built-in machine learning tools as well, which is really nice. So just as an example, I would say give this a go. I can only show you so much as part of the session, but yeah, this is a big flagship kind of tool that more people are starting to use, and Adaptive are really leaning into this. So this will be a major feature or focus of future feature releases, I think, as well. So play around with it, have a go, build some small forecasts and see how the numbers come out, try some different statistical profiles, load in more actuals, just give it a play, and let me know what you think, more importantly. I've got a question about consolidation functionality as well. So yeah, I don't have any consolidation functionality to share with you today on this call within Adaptive Planning. There are there's some interesting and exciting things coming down the pipeline around the new consolidation tool and functionality. But we can reach out to you with some notes on those, and we can sort of possibly have a separate session to go through that stuff as well. But there's more happening on the consolidation space, but nothing to show you today on this side, but there are things happening, which is quite exciting. We've got another question. Can you import data directly through from HCM, including IDs, names, FTEs, using FPCM? I believe so. I'm not the man necessarily to ask. My experience with FPCM isn't the configuration manager for financial planning isn't extensive in that sense. But the idea is that you can sync dimensions. So IDs, names, and FTEs. You can load data directly into Adaptive and sync it up with your HCM system if that's what you're using, Workday HCM. And there's built-in connectors for the Workday tools in Adaptive. The FPCM tool typically allows you to sync up your dimensions and your levels and your account structures as well. So if you're storing things like employee ID as a dimension, or within HCM, then you can load that in through FPCM is the idea. Beyond that, as I say, I don't know too much more about it. But if you're storing it as data, you probably there's better or easier ways to integrate it with Adaptive than through FPCM, if it even offers that as an option. So that's sort of a slightly long-winded way of saying I don't really know. The idea is that it's more about dimensions and levels effectively. Anything beyond that's where you'd have to check your notes, I think, for the FPCM tool. There is somebody mentioning as well, reports on dashboarding. So yes, one feature that was scheduled for this release, but they've spent a bit more time on the Predictive Forecaster, was the ability to embed reports in dashboards. That has been pushed back. I believe that's now scheduled for R1-2025. So the ability to load, effectively embed reports in dashboards. So not just a link as you currently can do, but embed reports in your dashboard. That capability is still on the roadmap and is coming. I believe it's now scheduled for R1. They have pushed it back because, as you can see, this is just a small subset of the features that have been released in this particular round, but there's a lot more coming down the pipeline as well. So yes, that is still on the roadmap. Fear not. I'm quite excited for that one as well myself. I'm obviously conscious of time, so please keep the questions coming. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that you guys may have. The last thing to show you just on this little journey is OfficeConnect Write-Back. This one's a major feature for many of you, and it's one that's often asked about, and it's fairly simple. The ability to set up templates in Adaptive in Excel and have them write data back to your Adaptive Planning instance. That's now live within the system. This one wasn't scheduled to be released, I think, in R2, so this one effectively was swapped around with the report embedding, but so this is now released. It's now available to you today. If you have OfficeConnect and you've updated it, you should have this option available to you. And as I say, reporting in dashboards is coming around the corner. And I'll very quickly show you what this looks like. So a typical Adaptive Planning OfficeConnect instance, I've logged into this with the same login for the environment I've just been showing you. This is all linked up nicely. It's this nice report that I've got. But what I've also added in is a separate budget submission tab. Now, it's very straightforward in the sense that if you set up a view that's granular, that has, in this case, it's just one, the most granular level of our organizational structure is looking at individual GLs here. I have the ability to select the rows that I want to enable write-back for. And at the top, you can see there's a little option here with a pen icon. If you give that a click, it will turn on write-back mode and give me the ability to write data directly back into my plan. So there was the old predictive, some of you may have previously used planning for Excel. There was an add-in that used to exist for Adaptive that they've kind of sunset. This functionality effectively replaces that in a way, but that other tool allowed you to replicate sheets exactly as they appeared in Adaptive within Excel. This tool gives you a lot more flexibility. So this isn't a view that exists anywhere in my adaptive planning model, but I've built it in Excel with the drag and drop, just as you normally do with OfficeConnect. But then I've given myself the ability to select the rows and then input them manually into them. You can use formulas to drive this. I could have that be equal to that minus, I don't know, 50 or whatever. You can use formulas in there and I can drag that formula all the way to the end and that number will then be submittable, or I can manually type over that field as well. So, all the usual functionality in Excel applies. As soon as I click submit at the top there, it then writes that data back into Adaptive. And if I were to go, I've not got it open, and I don't have time to show you on this call right now, especially, but now that I've hit submit, it's now written that back in. If I disable write back, that number's now committed to my adaptive plan. So if I go back to my P&L, in fact, if I go to this view here and hit refresh, we might see the numbers shift through a little bit, perhaps, or maybe not. But the idea is it's now written back through. So the ability to do that, configure templates exactly how you like them, as long as they're the most granular view of the data within this particular perspective, you can build templates or any template you've already got. You can drag and drop it into Adaptive, link it up to the accounts, enable write back, and then have your end users submit their budget data directly from Excel. which is quite nice. A feature that a lot of people have been asking about, and it's very early doors as well. So this feature currently just allows you to enable write-back and then post it through. But there will be more stuff on the cards. An example of which, a question that's just come through, which is good. Overwriting existing numbers. Yeah, so any of the numbers that are in here currently have all been overwritten effectively by whatever's in adaptive for these numbers. I've overwritten them. There's a limited amount of kind of security in the sense of, stopping numbers from going back and overwriting them, but you can disable the ability to do this within the security permissions as well. So, the ability to write back. So you can control the flow of data. There's more options in there. But it's a very basic release at the moment. The ability to write data back at all is what the focus has been on. And some good questions coming in. I knew this would be a hot topic. So yeah, you can push back and overwrite existing numbers. That's sort of the default behavior of the add-in. We've got a question around pushing data back into the system in error. It happens. There is always a human process involved in this kind of thing. If you give somebody the ability to write back data and they have access to a template to submit data in Excel, like this one I've got here, then they'd be able to load data back in. The only benefit, or I guess the only caveat, is that their security in Adaptive, their data security applies here as well. So I have access to the London office. If I make a submission in error, then I can change the number directly within the planning tool here. I could go into Adaptive and add a note, and the usual steps and workflow processes that are built in, I can use those as well. But the good thing is that the data security still applies to Excel. So I can't change my view to somebody else's data, make submissions in error where I shouldn't. Any errors I make in the data, I can still make here. It's just the same as Adaptive. If I make an error in submitting a number within the browser in Adaptive, I can still do it here. As much as Workday, I'm sure, would love to be able to do it, removing the human element from this planning process, capturing data like this is always going to be a bit of a challenge. Future releases, I don't know what's on the roadmap for this stuff specifically, long term, but things like data validation in Write-Back, would be nice to have. And if that's the kind of functionality you'd like to see, then I encourage you as well, just while we're here, to go to your little nav menu in Adaptive, down to your support option, and then submit a request. Send in your suggestions like that. If you want to see stuff like data validation for Write-Back and things like that, send it in, because it does have an impact. They do read this. And I know from sort of had feedback from many customers who've made a suggestion, that feature then gets pushed to the Adaptive product team, and then you see it in a future release. So please, as well as sending questions in here today, make sure you send the questions in as a submission as well. We will do it as a partner, and we are in direct contact with them all the time, but it also helps if you guys are sending those submissions in, because, as I say, they do listen. So yeah, there's no way to stop the human error side of things necessarily, but there's stuff built into Adaptive already that works. Can you write back to multiple different sheets? Yeah, so you could set as many accounts. I mean, in this case, I could have multiple accounts across multiple sheets within this particular view. You can see here, if I select all these items, I've not unlocked the airfare line, but everything there has linked up. So if you've got, this could be one sheet's worth of accounts and another sheet's worth of accounts. If I've got, 10 different sheets worth of accounts on one view like this, I can enable them all for write-back in one view. There's no limit to the number of write-back links that you can set up in this particular instance. So yeah, absolutely, you can do that. Is there any audit trailing for the write-back? Yes. The existing audit trailing that's in Adaptive already applies here. So if I was to go back to my browser, you may have seen the functionality, right? The ability to right-click on a number. If I was to open up, say, the P&L, just so you can see it. So if you're in your P&L or any of your accounts in Adaptive, you can right click on one of these numbers, say your training accounts, go down to your explore cell option. You can drill on a number here, and you can audit trail it directly from this view. The audit trailing here also applies to the write-back. So any changes I make in Excel will still be tracked in here. In fact, I don't know why I've done that, because you can also audit trail directly from this place as well. So I can right click on the number in Excel and jump to the explore cell directly from the add-in. So yeah, any changes you make are automatically audit trailed, and you can access them straight from Excel as well. Do write-back show in the audit reports? Yes, they should do. Part of the audit trailing, yeah, it includes those as well. So sort of same kind of question, I think. But yeah, all of this is audit trailed. So it's kind of leaning on some of the existing functionality as well from a security perspective and the ability to write it back. But it is still a very basic first release of this tool. So just the ability to write back right now, line by line, as you can see in this case. I expect to see a lot more coming from this functionality as well as we go into the future, because it is a hot point of interest from pretty much every customer that I and Adaptive and Workday have spoken to, really. Having said that, that is a very quick whistle-stop tour. I realise I'm sort of slightly over, but just wanted to get through everything. Had quite a few good questions there as well, which was really nice. So yeah, thank you very much for the participation.